Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Campbell County Trunk Show presented by Postmark LaFollette right here on WLAF. Tonight is episode 5 of the Promised Land series, and this is a big episode because this is where we transition. The first 4 episodes have been really focused on how people and why people came to Campbell County, their relationship to the land. We've talked with Greg Miller, Bill Stanley, Boomer Winfrey, about reasons that people came here, including the coal mining industry. In our last episode, in episode 4, we talked with Boomer Winfrey at the Coal Creek Miners Museum about how things in the 20th century started to change. How around World War I and World War II, coal was really popular, but then how mechanization and more machinery had caused people to have to shift and look for jobs in different ways. What we have to remember is that in the 1800s, with the Industrial Revolution, so many things started to change, with factories becoming more prevalent. And then, in the 20th century, when we had things like the airplane and automobile, people could become much more mobile and move around, but also those things had to be made, such as Henry Ford's assembly lines. So it gave people a new reason and a new way to work, and many of you, if you're like myself, have had a lot of family that have moved north to work in factories, especially in the automotive industry. So another big thing that happened in the 20th century is the TVA came into this area. We know that's shaping a lot of our area today, from the lakes to the recreation. We all like to fish, we enjoy our 4 state parks in Campbell County, and it's led to 47% of Campbell County being public lands. The 20th century Campbell County was a big time. People had been farming, people had been coal mining, people had been timbering, but now there's all these jobs to be had in different areas, especially up north, and so many people went there to find work as more machinery and different things changed the coal mining industry, and people needed different ways to make a living. So, tonight on episode 5, we begin to look at what did the TVA mean to this area? What did the move to the north mean to this area? And now, in the future episodes, in the next few weeks, we're going to explore now why people are coming back. When we see so many people around here with Ohio tags, or Indiana tags, or Iowa tags, or Michigan tags, well, these are often people that our ancestors met when they went up north, have told them about this area and moved back. Many of those same people are people that are from here that are moving back, so it's all very much connected. But first, as we've talked to Boomer and learned about how the coal mining industry changed things and how mechanization changed things, tonight we're going to talk with Greg Miller once again. And he's going to talk to us about why people started to move north, how the TVA changed things. And we think you're really going to enjoy it because it's really going to start putting things together for us in this series. And so we're so excited to bring that to you. And as always, we want you to remember, if you've not watched episodes 1 through 4 or our episodes prior to that, you can do so by going to postmarklafollette.org, clicking on Trunk Show, or you can go to the WLAF YouTube channel and check it out there. Also remember, our next episode, episode 6, is going to be Wednesday, April 28th at 8:30 p.m. right here on WLAF, and this episode is going to be available to stream after tonight. So we hope you enjoy this interview, and as always, too, we want you to reach out and share your stories with us, and we're going to have that information for you tonight. You can reach out to us by phone, email, social media, whatever works best for you. So with that, let's go ahead, turn this over to Greg Miller, and let's chat a little bit with him. What are some of the reasons that caused people in the 20th century here in Campbell County to start heading north?
I think economics was probably the primary reason. I know with my ancestors, a good many of them left and went north. There used to be a joke which probably had more truth to it than fiction, and that was if your ancestors could afford 2 tanks of gas, they went to Michigan. And if they could only afford one tank of gas, they went to Ohio. And apparently, if you could only afford one tank of gas, you made it to about Dayton, Ohio, which that was the area that almost all of my relatives that went north wound up. They were all in the Dayton area. But I have friends whose relatives went on up to Michigan. So I think jobs had a great deal to do with it. I know in the story of my grandparents, it was hard to find work, the work they could find. I know my grandfather worked on the railroad some and then worked in the mines, but he went north and got what you might think of as a less dangerous type of job and stayed up there. Areas that have a lot of natural resources a lot of times don't have a deep base economic foundation where you can have a great deal of work in other areas. And so I think they went up there primarily for the money. If they could have gotten good jobs and worked here, they would have stayed. But they had to pick up and abandon their culture and their homes and go where they could find work.
So speaking of your grandparents, where exactly up north did they move to, and what kind of jobs did they get into up there?
Well, my grandfather, as I said, he worked in the area in mining and worked on the railroad for a while. And the job he had on the railroad, evidently, the only picture I have of him working on the railroad showed him on the tracks. It looked like he was building or repairing tracks, and he was just a young fella, just gotten married. I guess he was maybe in his late teens. But when he went up north, I think he did a variety of jobs. I think he owned a restaurant for a while, but ultimately wound up working as a butcher and worked in a grocery store, a large grocery store in Dayton itself. I used to go up there in the summers and spend time with my grandmother and my cousins, and Dayton always seemed like a second home to me. But it was a beautiful area. It's changed a lot now, of course. If you lived up there, it wasn't a question of finding a job. It was just a question of where you want to work. People would look for a place that was convenient or they enjoyed doing, but it was never a question of being able to find work. Well, sadly, if you go up there now, those factories are empty. The grass is growing up in the cracks of the parking lots. I knew things had drastically changed when I had a fella come through one day, and I asked him why he was here, and he said he was looking for work. And I said, well, where are you from? And he said, Dayton, Ohio. So, things have changed, I guess.
With the TVA coming to this area and people starting to move north, and we're kind of in between two world wars, how do you think that the TVA changed things and affected things here when it came in? What do you think it's still doing to this day?
Well, TVA was a massive project, of course, and you can't inject that kind of money, that kind of resources, and affect that kind of change without making change top to bottom. And it basically did. I remember my father telling me when he was a small child, he was growing up out in the Coolidge community of Campbell County. And he said when TVA came, the things that affected him directly, he was, I guess, he'd have been around 12 when the Norris Dam was completed. But what he noticed as an immediate effect for him was they got electricity, which they didn't have before that, of course. And the water backed up over his school, so they had to move the school, and it backed up over the mill where they, took their grain to get it ground up. And if you go to the Cedar Creek Bridge when the lake is low in the wintertime, if it's low enough, you can still see the concrete steps of the old Coolidge School just down below the bridge. And if you look up just above the bridge, you can still see some of the planks of the flooring of the old mill. So it covered that area. Well, he was a child, and that was what he noticed, as far as TVA affecting him. It was a cultural revolution. You had all of these folks that came in that were from other areas, other cultures, well-educated people, and they wanted to help us. Well, sometimes the help is a bit heavy-handed, but usually it also is appreciated and needed as well. And one of the areas that it impacted that wasn't often spoke of was agriculture. They came in and they went to farmers and they taught them how to avoid erosion, how to plow the land, how to care for the land in a way that traditional farming techniques hadn't used. Well, that was one of the TVA initiatives, of course, that came in to improve farming techniques, to teach people how to work with the contours of the land, really early environmentalism, which was needed and was important. And so that was one of the efforts. They actually had cultural representatives, I guess you would say, that taught people how to use electric devices. They sent people out into the communities to teach them how to take advantage of electricity and what was available. They built, of course, Norris, Tennessee, they built a little community as a model community to show what could be done, I guess. But it impacted the culture in a mostly positive way. Of course, there's always sacrifice with something that extensive. Some of the best farmland in Campbell County, of course, was flooded, and there were many communities that were flooded completely. Little communities like, oddly enough, the little community of Boy, and then just, I can't remember if it was up the river or down the river from Boy, was Girlton. But you had all these little communities and little places and homes. They made a famous movie about a lady from Campbell County that refused to evacuate her house as the water backed up. And they finally hauled her out in a boat when the water was up in her house. And of course, you had graveyards that were put underwater, so they had to transfer the bodies. Baker's Forge is one of those cemeteries where they had relocated the graves from the area to be flooded and moved them up on top of the hill into the Baker's Forge Cemetery, or what became Baker's Forge, which was very disturbing, of course, to people to think about their loved ones being disinterred and then relocated. And they had to cut a tremendous number of trees when they created the Norris embayment, but they hired people to cut trees to clear the embayment. They, of course, demolished houses, tore down structures, and so on, so that they could create a clear area of all the Native American sites in the areas that were flooded. And there were several in Campbell County. And they examined them, took artifacts, kept detailed records, and then the water backed up and flooded most of them. The one at what used to be called Meredith's Cave, there above where Shanghai Marina is now, that one remained above water. But some, like Cove Lake, was created to reduce the amount of sediment flowing into the Norris embayment. So that flooded the largest Native American site in Campbell County, but they did an extensive survey of that as well. They made an effort to try to preserve as much as they could what they were putting underwater. It certainly transformed Campbell County and East Tennessee.
We hope you enjoyed the first part of our interview tonight with Greg Miller, and that's really what the Trunk Show is about. We want to hear your stories, but we really want to just have a conversation. We all sit around and we talk about these things, at the local stores, at the local eateries, and this is meant to be the same thing, but just on TV, on the radio. So we're really excited to talk and learn a little bit more with Greg about these things. Just like when we talked with Boomer Winfrey, we learned about the Briceville and the Freighterville mining disasters and how that affected people. And something we talked to him about and we've mentioned before is the Coal Creek War and the convict lease system and how that really affected the area and really how it changed mine safety and also child labor laws and different things in this area. Now that's very important, and we've talked about it and we want to share it in later episodes because it really touches on the people of this area. And so we're excited to bring that to you in a few weeks. But for now, we want to go back to Greg Miller and continue focusing on the TVA and the movement north. So with that, I'm going to toss it back to you, Greg, and let's chat a little bit more.
You mentioned the interwar period. Once it happened, 1936 or thereabouts, and you had electricity becoming more widespread, you had, of course, tourism became a thing that we began to talk about and began to see. It laid the groundwork for change. If you go back to like 1860, for instance, there was almost no industry in Campbell County. The only thing that was listed, I think, in the 1860 census was a few small iron forges. They're sometimes referred to as a bloomery. Well, not sure why, but there was just a handful of those. Everybody was engaged in agriculture. People were mostly self-sufficient, except for a handful of merchants, bankers, and so on. But still, agriculture dominated, the rural East Tennessee. And when the war period came through and people began to migrate to places like Oak Ridge to work, for instance, my mother worked in Oak Ridge for a while. She didn't know what she was doing there, or why she was doing it. She just had a job, and they told her that she was cleaning out that her job was to clean out a water tank. She said she had to crawl down in it, and it was magnetized, and it would pull the bobby pins out of her hair. If she didn't take them all out, if she missed one, she'd feel it moving, and it would go out. But she had to scrape the inside of this tank. Well, she had no idea what it was. They told her it was a water tank. Years later, when she seen a picture of Fat Man and Little Boy, she realized that she had been cleaning, I guess, either something that was a prototype or something they were doing, but had a connection to the atomic bomb project. But she said, we were actually watching a documentary on television, and she pointed and said, "That looks like the thing I crawled into and cleaned out." And it was a picture of the atomic bomb. So of course it was just a casing, empty casing. But that just, goes to show you, how things worked back then. But again, I think if you hadn't had TVA, it would have been very difficult to have had Oak Ridge, because you needed a tremendous supply of electricity that was affordable, available, and was was there right where you needed it. But I think TVA increased the rate of expansion, not just in the rural areas, but in all of those areas. As the dams were constructed on down the way, it increased navigation, tourism. It just did a host of things that, if it hadn't been for TVA, for instance, there'd be no Cove Lake State Park. Us Scotch-Irish ancestry people, were accused of being clannish, and I guess we are to some extent, and maybe not always as fond of outsiders as we might otherwise be traditionally. But with tourism, it changes you and it changes them, and you learn, that you enjoy meeting people that are different and from different places, and you learn from them. So it changed the culture, it mixed the culture up, it provided opportunities, it provided electricity. So it was a top to bottom cultural revolution as well as an industrial revolution. And as I said, sometimes, when people say, well, TVA was, to eliminate flooding, or, it I think misses the main point, which was it did those things, and perhaps they didn't even anticipate the total impact. But the fact is, this area today is the way it is in large measure because of TVA. This area would be much different, I think, culturally and economically than it was without TVA. And I personally feel that overall it was a very positive thing. It's sort of like building an interstate. You view it as a good thing unless it goes through your house. Then it's not so good. But I think overall it was a positive thing, and made a huge impact, perhaps more noticeable in rural areas like Campbell County than maybe in, say, Knoxville. It no doubt impacted Knoxville, but in a rural area, I think it probably made a bigger difference over time. But it just was a game changer. The only way you can say it. I don't know that this area would have ever been a tourist area without TVA. We have beautiful mountains, but I don't know if we would have had a reason to draw people here, or even if we'd had the inclination to do it. But I remember seeing a brochure from shortly after Norris Dam was opened up for LaFollette, and LaFollette was advertising itself as the gateway to, the Great Smoky Mountains, but also the gateway to Norris Lake. And people began to emphasize that even almost immediately from the construction of Norris Dam. Cities like LaFollette began to actively recruit tourism and tourists. You had people passing through, but how do you get them to stop? Well, if you've got 600 miles of shoreline in the county, it's a little easier to figure out a way for somebody to stop and say, hey, check out this great lake we've got, which we didn't have before. And then you add the mountains to that and the beautiful scenery and the wonderful people, and you've got you kind of jumpstart a tourism industry right from the get-go.
And there's a great picture that actually we have from the Campbell County Historical Society that's an overview of LaFollette in 1906. And, talking with Boomer and going through this series, kind of making those connections of the fact that, it's a picture that shows a railroad and how the infrastructure with the ore and the coal industry brought those transportation methods here and through here, which later, like you're saying, while we stayed largely on farms and agriculture, we started to build this infrastructure that attracted, TVA and the federal government to this area. And it's interesting to think now, if you were to compare Campbell County in 2021 versus 1906, most people that you talk to nowadays, what are you going to do this weekend? They're either fishing on North Lake, they're going to go ATV riding, which a lot of that's reclaimed coal mines. And it's pretty interesting how things are a cycle, how they do change. Like, for instance, the theme of this is talking about people moving north in TVA. Your grandparents moved north, become a butcher for your grandfather. Your mom works at Oak Ridge because of the TVA, and maybe cleaned an atomic bomb prototype, which is an amazing story at the same time. And you think about, like you're saying, with Campbell County having 4 state parks, to my recollection, the 3 sister state parks that really kicked off the Tennessee state park system, Big Ridge, Norris Dam, Cove Lake, started right in this area because of that, and we are the only county in Tennessee with 4 state parks. We have Cove Lake, Norris Dam, Indian Mountain, and then of course we have the Cumberland Trail as well, which highlights a lot of these ridge tops and mountains around here. So it's all these connections, right? And you're saying tourism that bring people back. And so many of those people are people that have heard from our people that moved to those areas, and it's like that, wow, this is a really great area. Like you said, maybe we didn't necessarily want to leave, but we had to at that time. And the great thing, I think, for us too, is there's the climate and everything hasn't changed. This is still such an area that's ripe, for farming and agriculture, and you can do that in so many different creative ways now. You can make, careers here, even being outfitters or guides on the lakes, fishing guides. So it's how do you make and take advantage of the resources you have. In the past, it's coal mining, it's timbering, and there's still some of that here. Not a whole lot, but now with tourism, the lakes and the land, there's all these different opportunities that are being presented to people. And to me, the most interesting thing is talking to people, like you said, and being open to new experiences. And we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you.
All right, folks, that's going to do it for us here tonight. That's going to conclude our episode. And we want to remind you that our next episode is going to be Wednesday, April 28th, 8:30 p.m., right here on WLAF. As always, you can catch this and prior episodes streaming online at postmarklafollette.org. Just click on Trunk Show, or go to the YouTube channel for WLAF and check us out there. So you can stream us anytime and catch up on what we've been up to. Now, what we've been up to is one thing, but we want to hear about what you've been up to, your history, and we want you to share that with us. As always, we're going to share the information on the next screen, so please reach out to us via email, phone, social media, whatever works for you. So, on April 28th at 8:30 p.m., when we come back, we're going to continue this talk about going north, what that means, and why people are starting to return to this area. So we're really excited to bring that to you, because that's the last 5 episodes of this Promised Land series, and we think you're really going to enjoy it. So until next time, stay safe, share with us, and be well. Thank you.